Hello everybody, welcome back to the game table. Thanks for dropping by. Today, just want to give you an overview, maybe a little discussion about Find, Fix, and Strike. I picked this up a little while ago because I saw it on Wargame Vault. It was like $10 at the time, so I thought I'd give this a try. Just because I've been playing around with different rule sets, and I thought, well, let's give this a shot. I don't know much about David Manley, but his name comes up quite a bit on Facebook in the naval wargaming stuff, and he does a lot of rules that go out onto Wargame Vault, and so I thought, yeah, I'll give it a shot. And it does say fast play. Now, a lot of the rules I've seen from him, I guess, are mostly going to be World War I. So I think this was his entry into World War II. I could be wrong, but that's the impression that I get from looking around on Wargame Vault. And so I was like, yeah, let's give it a shot. And I went ahead and got it because I really couldn't find anything out there in internet land. I think maybe I saw maybe one or two AARs, but they really didn't discuss rules mechanics. They just kind of tell you how the game's played out, and that really doesn't tell me how the game actually plays. So the curiosity was still there. So I went ahead and got it for myself. Let's talk about it. So the book itself is like 52 pages, somewhere in there. You got a nice cover on the front, and let's kind of go through here. You got your little secondary intro page, some nice shots of battleships there for you. And this is version 1.1 of the rules here, according to the little blurb right there. David Manley. I don't know if Longface Games is his company alone and just what he publishes under, but that's where I see a lot of his games come out from. Now, what we have here in the table of contents, there's a little intro, talk about scale, the dice you need, ship types, different scenarios you can play, visibility, the turn sequence, initiative phase, talks about ship movement, the air phase, gunnery combat, coastal, torpedo boats, the in phase. Then it's got some additional rules for mines, the campaign rules, which is nice. I've seen some games that have that. This would let you have a hex map of wherever you're playing, and you can move ships, submarine actions, and things to kind of give you a long linked battles, kind of makes your battles have some importance. Then the aircraft data tables and ship data tables. All within, it's the ship data table start on page 36, but then it's 20 pages with a couple, 2 player aid charts. So you end up with around 52 pages or so. So the introduction just kind of tells a little bit about why he made this. And then the scale. Now, this is a game that's going to play in inches. So if you're used to playing centimeters, switch over to inches, and that helps to facilitate the fast play. It does say a scale of 1 inch to 1,000 yards. So this is going to be, it says that the scale of the ships would be great from, say, the 124, 13000, 14800 I would throw in there, and then 16000. If you went bigger, like the 1800 or 1200, he says you might want to adjust your ranges because that means things really shrink. But even if with the 124, yeah, that lets you feel like you can maneuver, but again, that really starts bringing the ships close together, and it might not feel like accurate distances. So your mileage may vary with that, but it works. It works. It is not unlike, say, playing Naval Thunder kind of a thing. So it works. It works. Then the dice, you only need a couple of dice. So far, most of the playing just with the basic gunnery, which is what I started with. I'll throw it out here now, have not played with the aircraft rules as far as a game with aircraft or torpedoes. Mostly when I approach a new game, I just start with the gunnery because that's the easiest. However, having read through, torpedoes and aircraft are not that much more difficult to add. But what I'm saying, I mention that only because for gunnery, I really only use 2 dice, and it's generally 1 dice per person. Okay, so you just need a couple of dice. You don't need buckets of dice. Then it's got a definition of the ship types, all the way from battleships to battle cruisers. And yes, they have ship data charts, but if for some reason you find a ship that's not in the charts, he's got a generic table that you can use to kind of categorize the ship that you found, which I thought was nice. and it's got some suggestions on armor factor. Again, if you find a ship that's not in their data charts, you can actually easily add it in. And this is really good. I did see another game, I think it's Grand Fleets. It had a really, I don't know if I want to say complicated, but a very mathematical way, excuse me, a mathematically based system of figuring tonnage and all kinds of stuff. So this is really nice. If you just know that if it's like a light cruiser, here's some typical stats of a light cruiser, modify that as you see fit, and away you go. So it's kind of nice. Torpedo tube, kind of some information on maybe arcs of fire for gunnery, how the torpedoes would be mentioned on charts. Again, very simple, kind of just, you know, makes common sense if you've played a lot of Navy games. If you haven't played a lot of Navy games, real simple to follow and understand where your port arcs, starboard arcs, your front and aft. I think I tried to swallow something down the wrong pipe. I do that a lot when I talk to you guys on video. So, you know, just a few basic game mechanical things that will affect your game. Then you pop right into scenario setup. And again, I thought this was really nice. Real simple way to put weather into your game, visibility, really good. If you're playing a pre-made scenario, probably some of these conditions might be set for you. But if you're just playing a pickup game, you and a buddy lay out a couple ships, roll a dice 6, it will tell you wind strength. That actually can play into the game. Later on, like the smaller ships can actually be affected by wind strength and sea state, you know, how rough the sea is. That actually can play into this. But, you know, again, if you're just kind of starting out, you can actually just ignore that. But it incorporates that in just to a couple of dice roll modifiers for combat. So it's not an overly complicated system that you have to track. It's kind of nice. In fact, you could even make up a scenario where over time the weather changes. Maybe it gets better, maybe it gets more rough. But I thought it was nice. They just have a nice little scenario setup section. Also lets you know if it's day or nighttime. You can even randomly determine how far you can see. Roll a couple of dice, look at the little chart. That can be modified for the time of day. And that might let you say, oh, our ships can only see out to 22 inches. Now, the game doesn't tell you why you can only see 22 inches. That leaves it up to you. So if you roll on the chart and it says we can only see 22 inches, then you can blame that on fog. Maybe it's very early in the morning and the sun's blinding you, whatever. It leaves it up to you to make that kind of detail if it's important. But I think that's kind of cool because that also gives some importance to the spotter craft. And the aircraft rules are pretty simple, so we'll cover those actually here in a moment. Then it's got crew and command quality, a veteran, average screen, admiral if he's brilliant, average, or inept. Mostly for the admiral, that will affect initiative dice rolls. Then your crew, that might affect things for like damage control rolls, but it has a little chart to determine if you need that. Otherwise, you can just set average for everything, and then you really don't have to worry about penalties. You know, just they cancel each other out. Average crews against average crews, so just roll your dice standard. Then it's got setting up the table. Again, that will affect if you're admiral, who gets to place first, if you have an inept admiral or a really good admiral. Visibility and sight. You know, again, just kind of real simple little read through. Your line of sight. Are you being blocked by ships, islands, things of that nature? Can you see your target? What do the spotter craft bring? What do radar? How does that affect things? Again, just little blurbs, not pages of information. Just like, for example, radar. Surface search radar may be used to spot targets out to 30 inches. Use of surface search radar reveals the location and size class of the ship, but not the identity. Fire control radar might allow a gunnery bonus in poor visibility. And that would be in the charts. So easy peasy. Okay, so just going along here. Then we pop into the turn sequence. It's not much, really. It might look like quite a bit to a turn sequence, but it's not too bad. Initiative phase, your ship movement, the air phase, which has some steps within it. That's probably the more complicated, but again, usage of aircraft's pretty easy. We'll see here in a second. Then there's gunnery combat, then you would do the surface ship torpedo attacks, and then you end the turn. Now the initiative, but basically again, rolls down to a dice roll. Could be modified by your admiralty score, possibly crew training. Just roll a dice 6. It's a dice roll. Ship movement, very simple. If you've played, say, Naval Thunder or so, ships are rated in movement of up to inches. So this really doesn't use yards and knots. So it keeps everything very simple. So your ship can move 7 inches. Maybe your ship can move 6 inches. Then the larger ships are allowed like a single turn of up to 90 degrees. You can make that at the start or end. Or somewhere in between, and you turn on the stern. So there's not any kind of turn indicators. You don't have to move a certain amount of distance forward. The only rule really for the movement is ships are always moving a minimum of 1 inch because they keep moving forward unless they've suffered some kind of damage that prevents them from moving. So they can, and then there's no acceleration or deceleration rules. You just decide how much do you want to move. And there's no plotting of movement either, so you don't need additional paper to plot and track your movement. Basically what happens is when you've got your initiative, you alternate moving and shooting. So the player with initiative, they can either shoot first, move first, and then you alternate. So you just decide then how you want to move, and then you're always kind of moving in reaction to your opponent. So again, pretty easy. Winner of initiative decides whether to move first or second. So this might be one of those situations where the initiative winner will move second just so they can adjust based on what their opponent does. Or you might want to move for, you know, it's up to you to decide, but it keeps it fluid, no plotting. Now it does have here evasive movement, so if you're a destroyer or a cruiser, CACLs, they can evade. You can't launch aircraft, recover aircraft, use torpedoes, or fire your guns if you're evading, because I guess you're juking and jiving. But it does give you a bonus on your defense roll for being shot at, and that actually could be very, very important. And then it's got sea state effects on movement, depending on how tough the sea state is and how it could affect ships. But again, look at that. It's one page. It's easy. Yeah, if you play like a smaller ship, like a destroyer, then you can do up to 180 degrees worth of turns. So you can do like a 90 degree at the start of your turn, move your ship, and then a 90 at the end of it. Easy. Oh, sorry. Ships, they can't move during the turn. So they turn first and then they move. I misspoke there. But the small ships can make a 90 degree turn, do their movement, and then make another 90 degree turn. So easy. Then we get into the air phase. Weather can affect that. There are limits on how many aircraft you can launch and recover. Now recovering aircraft is basically you just land the aircraft near the ship, and then it says here, flights that are in contact with an aircraft carrier may land on up to 3 flights. They may land on per turn. Up to 4 individual spar aircraft that launch from carriers and that land on flight deck may also land on it. So at some point later on in a phase, you move your plane. So if last turn you moved your plane next to the plane it has to land on, like if it's a spar craft from a battleship, now it would recover it. Then you can assign fighter flights to a cap, so that will let you launch some aircraft out, or actually probably aircraft that are already out, but they fly out a certain distance and then they kind of have an area that they're in charge of defending. Move your aircraft. You just move them out to the distance. There's aircraft charts that show you all their distances that they can move. Launch aircraft says CVs can launch up to 3 flights. Generally, you will launch it and then you place it next to your ship, and then next turn they can move. There's an emergency cap. So if you had just launched some aircraft, had them sitting next to your ship, and like enemy aircraft are coming, you make a dice roll. If you pass this dice roll, then those planes can engage those incoming aircraft. Otherwise, they're too busy forming up. Then you can do the cap. If you have enemy aircraft that come within the cap that you set up, cap is the, I think it says it in here. I can't remember. Like combat air patrol. Combat air patrol. So if you send some aircraft up and they're in their cap area and then enemy aircraft come in, then they can do a little combat. Then if the enemy aircraft survive all that, then they can make their attacks on the surface ships. Then it's got anti-aircraft and air combat, which is basically comparing combat factors, roll a dice and see what happens. Again, not overly complicated, and I'm not reading all the rules to you, but aircraft, just by the fact that it has a lot of little pieces, it does seem to be the more complicated aspect of the rules, but honestly, it's not overly complicated when you read it. I'm just not super familiar with it because I haven't played with them yet. I was trying to get Gunnery down first, but having read them, it was like, yeah, this isn't too bad. It does have air operations at night. Gunnery is where I did spend a couple games trying to run through, and that also takes up a few pages, but again, it's not overly complicated. This is the part that I think most people are interested in. Yeah, torpedoes are important too, but the gunnery combat, that's what people like, are the battleships shooting at each other. It's not too bad. Now, what's nice is you don't necessarily have separate data pages for the ships. Like, here's an example. I've got this printed out. I got it on a sheet protector so I can make notes as needed. Basically, you got your ship name, the type of ship, the size, class, speed, its attack factor, main gun caliber, the defense factor, the anti-aircraft factor, the protection, which is like its armor factor, where the torpedoes are located if they have it, and then any special notes. The turrets, top of the list, it's got 4-spar aircraft. That's its note. Now, the combat is so easy, and this might be what people like. I was playing in a General Quarters 3 game, and we were doing, it was like Dutch ships versus Japanese, and there was like 8 destroyers per person. Then the Dutch had 3 cruisers, and then it had 2 battle cruisers. So that's like 13 ships that I had. And then the Japanese player had a similar amount of ships. It had 4 cruisers and about 8 destroyers or so. It was a lot. I think they had a few more. The only thing that was really easy in the General Quarters to manage that was movement, because you can move a squadron, just plot for the lead element, and everybody kind of falls in line. But the gunnery, that takes forever when you do a lot of ships in General Quarters, because you gotta plot who's shooting where, and you gotta, do a little bit of math, convert your distance into yards, look at a gunnery chart. It's not bad. When you know the game, it plays pretty well. But honestly, we spent 2 sessions, always like maybe 4 hours per session. It was like 8 hours to kind of come to a conclusion. And the gunnery combat didn't sink any ships. What sunk the Dutch ships were the Japanese brought like a crazy amount of torpedoes. And in General Quarters, torpedoes are absolutely devastating. So the gunnery combat really didn't do anything, but it took us 8 hours to resolve several torpedo hits to decide a winner. That rule set really shines with smaller engagements, maybe 3 or 4 ships a person, maybe. This is going to be for that kind of game where you've got 8 destroyers, several cruisers, a couple battleships. This will play really good because gunnery and tracking damage is pretty simple. So the way this works here, I wonder if I can zoom in a little bit so you can see the pages better, the numbers. Let me see if I can zoom in for you. Alright, that might work. So for example, let's say I've got a turrets shooting against a turrets, okay? That way I don't have to switch a bunch of paper. Basically, what you're going to do, again, goes back to initiative. Player with initiative, they can shoot first. They probably want to. Because one thing here, which helps make this deadly, is after you resolve an attack, the damage is applied immediately. Whereas General Quarters, all the gunfire is simultaneous. So it takes a while to whittle ships down, it feels like. Yeah, sure, once the turn is that phase is done, all the damage is applied. It's just that you're still rolling for a lot of stuff. Anyway, this feels like it goes quicker when I'm playing my little sample battles. It does play better because once you've applied some damage, that begins to immediately affect your opponent's ability to do something. So let's say I've got a turret shooting at a turret. Basically what you do is you look here, he has an attack factor of 5 for his main guns. And what you do is you roll a die 6. course, that fell off camera, so I take 3, add that to the main gun score, 8. Then the defender will roll a die 6, adds that to their defense factor, which in this case I rolled a 5. I thought I did. And I have a defense factor of 5. So I have an attack score of 8 versus a defense score of 10. That shot missed. That's the basic right there. That's it. That's the basics. Okay, now they got some things to modify that. We can look at that for sure. But that's the basic gist right there. You roll a die 6, compare your attack factor versus the defense factor of the enemy ship. That lets you know if you hit. That also kind of lets you know how much damage you do. Because let's say the attacker rolls really well and the defender rolls poorly. The difference then will determine possibly how much damage you do. So let's take a look at some of the rules here. There are some modifiers to that basic dice roll that you do. One, you're going to check your distance. Again, this is all measured in inches. So if you're at extreme range, there could be a modifier to your attack roll. Long range, short range possibly. There's modifiers. If you're a battleship shooting your 15-inch guns at destroyers, there could be a modifier for that. And then all those modifiers are right down here. So the attacker has a list of modifiers to check. It only takes a second to kind of go through. So if you're like a BB, BC, cruiser, shooting main guns at short range, you get a +1 to that attack roll. What I liked here, this doesn't represent individual batteries firing or barrels. It does it for the ship overall. And I thought what was neat is you don't have to worry about are you broadside necessarily. All you have to do is check if the enemy ship is in a forward or aft arc, and they have a modifier for that. If your target is in the forward or aft arc, you get -1 to your dice roll, which is just a clever way of saying not all of your main guns can shoot on a target in your forward arc. Now, it's again simplifies things because this is quick play rules, whereas if you played a more complicated game, you might have to decide, okay, well, I've actually got 2 turrets in the front arc. Those have 3 barrels each, so I'm rolling 6 dice. So this kind of, again, for fast play, simplifies that a lot. So you just apply your modifier. The defender has a couple modifiers to their defense dice roll, not as many, but could be devastating. Then again, you decide who wins out in that dice roll. Now, the next thing it says to do is armor penetration. That's about as crunchy as we get, but even then, it's pretty simple. You just have a little chart. If it's 16-inch guns or 18-inch guns, it gives you a penetration value based on range. Then you can compare that to the ships that you're the target ship's defense value. They actually have, well, it's a protection factor, and if you're equal or greater than the protection factor, you penetrate. Again, pretty simple. Now, that's only important because some potential damage results are going to be applied only if you can penetrate the enemy armor. If you can't penetrate the enemy armor, the most you can do is a light damage result, but even then you can't escalate the light damage. All right, so how do we determine if it's light damage or not? Well, basically, after you compare those dice rolls, if you rolled less than the target ship, no effect. So basically that's like a miss. If your attack roll equals the target's defense roll, you get a result that says straddled. If it's greater than or less than twice the target total damage, you do light damage. And if it's twice or more but less than 3 times, it's heavy damage. If you do 3 times or more but less than 4 times, that dice roll number, the ship is crippled. If you do 4 times or greater, the ship is sunk. But let me tell you, it's very hard to go 4 times the other person's die roll. All right, so let me show you what I mean. I don't really think you're going to score too many outright blow-ups. Unless it's against like a destroyer, possibly. Because again, like take the Tirpitz. It's got an attack score of 5. And if I roll a die 6, and let's say there's no modifiers, just the world is perfect, there's no penalties to the dice roll, the most I'm going to get on my attack score is like an 11. If I was shooting another Tirpitz, I have a defense of 5. So battleships shooting battleships, they're not going to blow each other up. That kind of makes sense. But let's take a look at the next stuff down here. We have, it's a Schleswig Holstein. I don't know. It's an older battleship. It shows. It has a defense of 3. So if I roll a 6, that gives me a defense of 9 compared to my attack roll of 11. That's only a difference of 2. So that's light damage. If I rolled a 1, then I would be 4. Let's see. They had a, what did I say their defense was? Was a 3. Defense factor 3. That's a 4. So what's 11 to 4? Oh, well, actually, that could be possible. You'd have to roll pretty good. Let's see. 4 goes into 11 twice. So that would be like heavy damage. Let's see. What if I was shooting at a hipper? So if I shot my hipper or the Tirpitz and I shoot into the hipper, that's a defense factor of 3. 3 goes into 11 3 times. Well, it says here a difference of 3 is going to give you 3 times or more but less. That gives you crippled. So I guess you can. It just, in theory, that works out. In practice, I never really scored those results. My dice rolls, maybe it's just because of poor rolling, I never saw anything like that. My modified numbers after rolling my dice, I usually only had differences of like 1 or 2 points. I never scored double. So I was always doing like light damage. So that was probably more a factor of my poor dice rolling. So in theory, on paper, if you shoot a big enough ship at a small enough ship, you probably could erase that ship in one shot. I'm gonna have to play more games to see that play out for myself. But what do you do with that? Okay, well, let's say I get straddled. Now what you could do, use your markers. I had some splash markers here I set out. Let me grab. What I did was just to indicate like a splash. Let's grab my Cleveland, for example. Most of the time I'm getting light damage on stuff. But let's say I got straddled. I just sat 2 markers like that, 2 splash markers. They probably don't show up very good on the lit screen here, but I just took 2 of these little splash markers and just sat them right there, and I knew that ship had been straddled. Okay, if it was light damage, I got these little cool explosions. 1 for light damage, 2 for heavy, and I could do, you know, if I really wanted to, I could do a 3rd one for crippled, or most of my other ones are fires, so I was just, I really didn't have one for crippled, so I was just setting a 3rd marker by it because that's like the 3rd level of damage. Now, that actually matters because your combat and your ability to fight is modeled by the level of damage that your ship is at. The other thing too is the damage can escalate. So if I suffer light damage and then I get hit by another light damage, that will add together and escalate it up to heavy damage. Then from there, if I get heavy damaged again, you would be crippled and then eventually you could sink. So instead of worrying about like individual hit points, that's how the game plays, is with damage levels. Now, one thing that I wish it had on the player aid that they give you is this maximum damage levels. So like a cruiser, no more than heavy damage against a battleship or a battle cruiser. So when I'm determining if I've done greater than but less than twice the damage, well, what is it, twice or more, like I can't get an initial outright crippled damage against a battleship. And it's not hard to remember, but this is a chart just because I forget little details like this. I wish it had been on the player aid. So yeah, your littler ships, you might score a super good dice rolls, and you got to just be aware that against larger ships, you are going to be limited because smaller caliber guns can't do too much damage against like a Yamato battleship. They just have way crazy armor. But that's a nice little effect that they have. Also here, that level of damage, this is the chart where that's important because if you're straddled, it doesn't affect your speed. You get -1 to your attack factor this turn only. Doesn't modify your defense. You can still do attack runs, torpedo attacks. You can still use aircraft. But as your damage levels go up, it does begin to hamper and hinder your ability to fight. And then you have escalating damage levels. That's what I was talking about. If a ship suffers damage equal to the level it has already sustained, its damage level escalates to the next level, except non-penetrating hits. So for example, a ship currently suffering light damage suffers a second light damage result. It escalates to heavy damage. If a ship suffers a lower level of damage than it's currently experiencing, it is straddled. So at some point, light like destroyers aren't going to contribute a whole lot of extra damage to, say, battleships that are already on the heavy damage. But they can straddle it, and that will give it a penalty that turn, but a destroyer without maybe using torpedoes or something, just through gunfire alone, really isn't going to sink that battleship. Kind of makes sense a little bit, but I don't know, just in how it's played out with my sample battles, the battleships are definitely the way to go. Battleships are good. If you lose your battleship, then you're kind of hurting. I know that kind of makes sense. It feels like, well, that's kind of how all games are. Well, it kind of feels that way at times, but this is how they do it. So there's no hit points, no hull points or anything like that. You just have these little escalating levels of damage, and because there's no ship data card, you got to find little markers and things to track the heavy damage, light damage. Now, the thing that gets me is the rules are pretty solid for the most part. Just one thing as far as gunnery that got me though is here, when you've determined your level of damage, if the shot penetrates or not, it says once you've determined your level of damage, roll a die 6 on the appropriate damage table below, inflict the damage effect listed. But just a little bit further down, it's got a section here for special damage, which says if you roll a 1 on a die 6 and you're still able to do damage, such as light damage, then you roll on the chart. So I'm not sure if I roll on the damage charts always or just when I roll a 1 as the attacker and I score at least, it says here damage. I don't know if they count straddle as damage. Possibly, I guess so. If you miss, I get in my mind I wasn't counting straddle as damage, but I guess technically that's damage. So yeah, I guess never mind. I guess I just answered my own question. Problem playing by yourself is sometimes I got nobody here to bounce questions off of except you guys. And then I figured it out. Thanks a lot, guys. I appreciate you being there for me. So I guess technically this rule then does make sense. So you're going to determine if you get light damage, straddled, light, heavy, crippled, then you're going to roll on the chart. Because straddled, I guess technically, is a damage effect. It goes away on its own, it recovers immediately, but I guess that's technically a damage level, so you would roll on this light damage chart. But again, you have to roll a 1, and you still have to cause damage. The other way, well, see, now I just asked myself that question again, because now it says you roll, and if you did damage, you check the chart. And then under special damage specifically, it says you only roll and check on the chart if you roll a 1 and still do damage, even if it's a straddle. I'm going to leave it on if you roll a 1, only because that's in the special section of rules just for special damage. That was probably the only thing in the rule book that just stood out to me is that right there. Otherwise, the game plays pretty good. Plays pretty good. But again, if you have light damage, heavy damage, or crippled, you roll, and then you can get fires, floods. Then at the end, after we move on, let's just say we get past coastal craft, you get past torpedo, then there's the end phase. You do have some damage control, then you can check to see if you get rid of flooding or your fire, just like most games. There's a chance you can also recover damage level a little bit. There's a chart you can roll on. So that does give some longevity to your ships. But again, I have found that the games still typically run faster than other games. So, even with a chance to repair damage, you don't successfully roll that off, and I'll just put it that way. It's nice to have the option there to potentially recover some damage, but I've found that in the little sample games I play, ships don't make those rolls that often. It's nice that it's there. Then we have some optional rules. Kamikaze attacks are in there, guided bombs, there's land targets. Then the campaign rules, again, there's several pages for if you want to have like a big old map and you're strategizing where your troops and forces go. That's in here as well. So, in a way, I'm feeling like a lot of the things that I would expect to see in a game are in here. It's kind of nice. Let's see, we'll get back down here. There's, again, the campaign rules take up a few pages. And then finally we get into the aircraft data charts, which gives you their movement, their air-to-air values, strike values, torpedo values, things like that. Then you get into the ships. Lots of ships. So you've got the British, Germans, US, Japanese, Italian, French, Russian, Dutch, Swedish, and then a couple player aids. Like I said, the player aid part is only 2 pages, and there are some things I wish that it had that aren't there. Now, as far as problems, like I said, the only thing that just caused me an initial question is the I just forgot what it was. We just talked about it too. Oh, when do you roll for the damage? The extra damage. Is it all the time or just when you roll a 1? Because the 1, anyway. The other thing too is finding light guns. So with your ship data, if I zoom in, your ships have, those are generic ships here, but let's say you've got this Swedish ship here. It's a cruiser. Has main gun attack value and light gun attack value. There's not one place that really easily in my mind explained what light guns are. I had to find that information though in a couple spots, mostly on the player aids, which is why they're there. But it says here destroyers, the CVs, and light guns only shoot out to medium range. And I'd say the only thing that it didn't really tell me was the armor penetration value of light guns. Because light guns, I'm assuming, are like the smallest guns you'll have. If you look at the armor penetration chart, there's 3.9 inch to 5.1 inch. They only go out to medium range. And it says at medium range there's 0 armor penetration, and then there's a penetration at short range of 1. So I'm assuming light guns are the 3.9 to 5.1. I just didn't see anything that said, yes, light guns are 3.9 inch to 5.1. That's an assumption I'm making, but it makes sense, so that's what I'm going with. The only other thing too is if I go back into, I gotta go back because, battleships, they have light guns, and I was wondering, well, what kind of damage can I do with light guns against a battleship? Well, none, really, because if it only has 1 armor. But another note that I found for the light guns, again, you got to go back to Gunnery here in the book. It's not on the player aid chart, but just a reminder note that says, and I want to show it to you, that light guns are basically only used against, I think it says, cruisers and destroyers. I want to find that note and read it to you. Okay, that's coastal craft. Let's see here. Light gun attack factor may only be used against destroyers and the motorboats. Okay, can't even use it against cruisers. So really it's just against the motorboats, as AA against aircraft potentially, but they have a separate AA value for that. Or carriers, CVE, carrier escorts. So unless you're like me, this is, I think it would be unfair for me to say that that's a fault of the rules, because I generally tend to skim over things. I don't read word for word a lot of times. So yes, it's there in the rule book. In my mind, I would have just liked a little blurb that specifically, like a lot of these other things, it has a little blurb that says light guns. Because reading through, that was a line I missed at first, and I had to do a lot of digging to find that. So I can't really fault the rules on that. I just wanted to call out, it would have been nice if there was just one little spot that said light guns, and then here's all the stuff you need to know about light guns, so you don't have to look in the book and on the player aid card to kind of figure it out yourself. The only other thing I found that maybe is wrong is penetration value. In the book, let me find the penetration value chart. In the book, the penetration value, gunnery combat, let me find the penetration chart. Oh, right here. It's got 16 and 18-inch guns. This is the value they penetrate at short, medium, long range, very long range, or extreme. Here on the data chart, I've already had to correct it in pen to make it match this. I didn't check all the gunnery levels, because the only one that seemed wrong when I first looked was here in the book. It says 16 and 18-inch guns are on the top line, and then the 14 and 15-inch guns are on the second line. Here on the player aid chart, it had, on the top line, it had the 15 through 18-inch, and then 14 by itself. So I wasn't sure which is correct, but I went ahead and put the 15-inch on the line below and left the 16 and 18-inch guns on the higher penetration chart, just because in my mind I felt that the book was correct, that the 14 and 15-inch guns probably have similar penetration values. So that's the only other thing that I wasn't sure on entirely. Okay, so overall, again, this is not a review, okay? I'm going to have to put that in the title. Not a review, just some initial thoughts to give folks an idea of what's in the rule set if you haven't picked it up yet. The game plays pretty good, very simple. Everything's in inches. You move, you rotate ships. It is not a simulationist game. I think this would be great for World War II actions if you want to put a lot of hardware on the table. I think it's simpler even than Naval Thunder. So if I was going to rate complexity of games, I would say this Find Fix Strike, then Naval Thunder, and then something like General Quarters, and then there's also, Command at Sea, Sea Krieg. Those would be on the higher ends. This, I think, will let you put a lot of ships out there. The rules, for the most part, make sense once you start playing. Indicating your damage levels, again, is just a matter of comparing my attack roll to your defense roll. Battleships to battleships, you're doing a lot of light damage. Lucky rolls, you might get that heavy damage or cripple. Shooting at the smaller ships. But for me, again, it always seemed to be that the attacker was rolling low, defender was rolling high, but that's not a fault of the game. That's my dice rolling. So overall, I think that if you are looking for what you would call the beer and pretzel, this would be a good place to go, and if you want to put a lot of stuff on the table. I don't think that this has got anything in it that says unplayable. Again, I think it has great, easy rules for bringing in your aircraft. The torpedo section as well plays out pretty good. I would say the only shortcoming is just make sure you read everything thorough, because some things that I would have liked to have seen as its own little separate blurb are buried within the rules paragraphs. And again, that's not a fault of the game. That's just me and the way my brain works and how I read things, I would have liked more little sections on stuff. But overall, though, I think once you get in there and you start digging around the rules, you'll probably have an easier time figuring things out than I do. I think we've talked long enough about this. This is 45 minutes for just an overview, so we'll just kind of wrap it up. Hopefully, this answers some questions for you about the game. If you do have more specific questions, you can put that in the comments. Let me know what you think. Maybe you've played the game. Maybe you understand the game a lot better than I do. Like I said, I've only played a few games, and they weren't even, and I'm trying to be full disclosure here, I can't even say they were full games. It was just like a couple of ships. Basically here, let me show you what I did. I just started out, let me see if I can rotate this here carefully. And I used the same ships, again, just because I was trying to get a feel for the game. I had an Iowa ship and my Cleveland against Bismarck and the Eugen, and they just kind of in the middle, because again, 30 inches is like the max, and your sight range is like 22 inches. So the ships are kind of close. They're shooting at each other, scoring some damage levels. You got to get close if you want to do. You don't really have to get that close because the battleships with their 15, 16-inch guns penetrate everything that they shoot at if they can score a hit, it feels like. So I would say if you really had to play this out, use your long-range gunnery as much as possible. I think you'll be okay. But with only, even this is 18 inches, and that's long range. And that would be 18,000 yards because 1 inch is 10,000 yards. So you just have to decide for yourself what kind of game you're looking for. Again, if you're looking for beer and pretzels, get a bunch of ships out. Even if you want to do a small game like Battle of the River Plate, maybe Denmark Strait, I think this would work too. You'll probably get results fairly quickly. I think for that I would still maybe prefer General Quarters 3. I like that level of detail. But if I want to play a lot of ships, then I definitely see the strength in this system. So anyway, parting thoughts. Thanks for watching. This is going up on Memorial Day, so if you're in the U.S. or some other part of the world where you celebrate Memorial Day here on the last Monday in May, have a happy Memorial Day. See y'all later. Bye.